The night I found out my best friend was destroying my life. He was standing in my mother's kitchen, laughing like nothing in the world could touch him. My phone had died hours earlier, so I was leaning against the counter, waiting for the pie to cool, when his phone lit up on the table beside the fruit bowl. He had set it down face up for maybe 3 seconds while he reached for a plate, and the screen flashed so bright it pulled my eyes to it. I was never the kind of person who snooped. I was the kind of person who trusted. That was my first mistake. The message on his screen said, "Make sure she doesn't see the revised offer until after Friday. Once she misses the deadline, the house is ours." For a second, I honestly thought my brain had misunderstood the words. House. Ours. Misses the deadline. I looked up at him. He was smiling at my little brother across the room, helping him carry cups to the porch. He looked warm, easy, familiar, like the person who had sat on our couch during bad grades, bad breakups, bad funerals, like the guy who had cried in my car the day my dad died and told me, "I've got you, Maya. I'm not going anywhere." I stared at his face so hard that my stomach started to twist. Then another message popped up. Sterling wants the signature as soon as possible. Don't let her talk to the grant office again. Grant office. That was when I knew this was not some ugly misunderstanding. This was my life, my family, my future. And the person helping destroy it was the boy I had called my best friend for 11 years. I didn't say a word. I didn't scream. I didn't drop the pie plate or throw his phone across the room. I just reached for my glass of sweet tea with hands that somehow stayed steady, and I watched him pick his phone back up without noticing my face had gone completely still. That was the moment everything changed. And what happened after that? That is the part nobody in my family saw coming. My name is Maya Bennett, and for most of my life, I believed friendship meant loyalty. I believed family meant blood. I believed people who sat at your table would never secretly set your house on fire. I believed all of that right up until the night I saw the message on Noah's phone. Noah had been in my life since we were 12 years old. We met because his mother cleaned houses on the same street where mine lived. And every summer the two of us would end up on the sidewalk together, riding bikes, eating popsicles, getting yelled at by the same neighbors. He was funny in a way that made adults lower their guard, and smart in a way that made teachers forgive his bad attitude. I was the girl who kept her head down, got good grades, and made lists for everything. He was the boy who could charm a lock off a door and convince your grandma to give him an extra cookie. We were opposites in a way that made us fit together. When my dad was alive, he used to joke that Noah was the son he never had and I was the daughter who would one day run the world and still forget where she parked. Noah would grin and say, "Mr. Bennett, you're supposed to pick favorites quietly." My dad had laughed so hard he nearly spilled coffee all over the table. After my dad died, Noah was everywhere. He helped my mother sort insurance papers. He drove my little brother Eli to baseball practice. He stood next to me at the funeral in a stiff black suit he kept tugging at like it was strangling him, and when I couldn't breathe through the grief, he pressed a hand to the small of my back and whispered, "You do not have to hold this up alone." At the time, I thought he meant it. My dad's death was the kind that leaves the whole family rearranged around the empty space. He had a heart attack on a Tuesday morning while opening Bennett Hardware, the family store he had run with my mother for 27 years. It wasn't a glamorous inheritance. It wasn't a fortune. It was a creaking old building on Maple Avenue, a house on the same street, and a business that survived on paint samples, screws, lawn chairs, and my father's stubborn belief that people still wanted to fix things instead of throw them away. When he died, the store should have been mine in spirit, but in reality it became a battlefield. My Uncle Ray, my dad's younger brother, had never liked the fact that my father was the one who built something stable while he spent his life hopping from bad investments to worse ones. Ray showed up 3 days after the funeral in a tailored coat and a fake sad voice, talking about what's practical and what your father would have wanted. He kept saying we should sell. Property values are up, he told my mother. You could pay off the medical bills, keep a cushion, start over. Start over. That was his favorite phrase. He said it like erasing a life was the same thing as being sensible. My mother, grieving and exhausted, almost believed him. I knew she wanted to. Selling would have meant easier months, fewer headaches, fewer bills. But it also would have meant giving up the store my dad had rebuilt with his own hands after he and my mother had nearly gone under during the recession. My father had seen the neighborhood changing before anyone else. Coffee shops, lofts, boutique apartments, investors circling like hawks. He knew the land beneath Bennett Hardware would one day be worth far more than the business itself. So he had done one smart thing before he died. He placed the building and the house into a trust with a condition. The property could not be sold unless my mother and I both agreed. And if we could turn the hardware store into a community market and keep it operating for at least a year, the building would remain ours outright, free of any challenge from Ray. It was my father's way of protecting us from the exact kind of people Ray had always been. And that was the opportunity. Not just the inheritance. Not just the house. The chance to save my father's legacy and build something bigger out of the wreckage. I had spent nearly a year trying to make it happen. I had worked full-time at a local interior design firm, taken night classes in small business management, and spent every spare hour building a proposal for a city preservation grant that could fund the renovation of the old store into a hybrid market, cafe, and workshop space. It was the kind of project the city liked to brag about: historic, community-centered, local employment, neighborhood revitalization. If I got approved, the grant money would let us renovate the building, stabilize the business, and keep the property from slipping into the hands of developers who wanted to replace every older structure on Maple Avenue with glass and steel. It was the best shot we had, and Noah knew every inch of it, because Noah had become my project helper. That was what he called himself. My helper. My right hand. My second brain. At first, I was grateful. Then I was dependent. Then I was blind. He offered to manage my calendar because I was doing too much. He offered to make my grant packets because I was too honest and too in the weeds to make the proposal shine. He offered to speak to the city office on my behalf because, in his words, bureaucrats talk in circles and you need somebody who knows how to cut through them. I should have heard the warning in that last sentence. Instead, I let him sit beside me at my kitchen table, formatting documents while my mother slept upstairs, and Eli complained about algebra, and the store sat across the street like a patient animal waiting to see whether we would save it or abandon it. Noah always seemed so sincere. When I missed a call from the grant office, he would say it had probably just been a scheduling conflict. When a follow-up packet arrived late, he would shrug and say the mail was unreliable. When my mother worried that we couldn't keep up with repairs, Noah would pour her coffee and say, "Maya's got this. She's the strongest person in the room." He knew exactly what to say to keep us all leaning on him. What I didn't know then was that he was also talking to my uncle behind my back. I found that out the night of my dad's anniversary dinner, when the message on Noah's phone lit up like a flare in the dark. The room had been full of noise. Eli arguing about whether we were having pie or cake. My mother cutting tomatoes with that tired, precise look she always wore when she was pretending not to be sad. Noah telling a story about getting locked out of his apartment once and having to sleep in his car until morning. Everybody laughing. Normal life? Ordinary life. The kind that makes betrayal feel even more monstrous when it finally shows its face. I took a sip of tea and asked Noah if he wanted another plate. He grinned at me. "You know me. Always." I nearly dropped the glass, because suddenly I remembered how many times he had said that same thing over the past year. Always. "I'm here. I've got you. You know me." And all this time he had been lying. I didn't confront him that night. I wanted to, but something colder than anger moved through me. Instinct. Survival. The kind of quiet you get right before a storm. I waited until everyone had gone home. Then I stood at the kitchen sink under the yellow light and looked at the screenshot I had sent myself from his phone while he was in the garage helping Eli find a flashlight. It was all there. The texts. The names. Sterling. Sterling was Victor Sterling, a developer with a polished smile and a reputation for swallowing entire blocks and leaving nothing behind but new paint and higher rent. He had been sniffing around Maple Avenue for months. I knew because I had seen his people trying to buy neighboring lots one by one. I had also seen with my own eyes how often my Uncle Ray had been too eager to answer calls when Sterling's name came up. The messages between Noah and Sterling were not vague. They were specific. She's emotionally attached to the property. Pressure her through the mother. Revised offer should appear generous. She's desperate enough now. Make sure the grant deadline is missed. Once the city files close, she'll have no leverage. I sat down on the kitchen floor because my legs stopped working. Noah wasn't just helping us lose the inheritance. He was arranging it. At first, I thought maybe there had to be some explanation that didn't make him a complete monster. Debt, blackmail, some ugly reason that would let me keep part of him intact. But the next morning, I checked our shared email folder and found something worse. A file had been deleted from my grant submission folder 2 days earlier. The scanned tax forms Sterling's office had requested had never been sent. The calendar invitation for my final review meeting had been moved to a fake time. A follow-up call from the grant board had been marked spam in my account. Someone had done all of it while pretending to help. I felt sick. I also felt stupid. That is the part no one tells you about betrayal. It doesn't just break your heart. It humiliates you. You start replaying every conversation, every favor, every long night you stayed up thinking you were building something with someone who was quietly sawing through the beams. I didn't tell my mother right away. I didn't tell Eli. I didn't even tell my best friend Lila, because I was scared that saying it out loud would make it true in a way I couldn't control. Instead, I started watching Noah. He was too comfortable. That was the first clue. He had become so used to sitting in our kitchen, opening our mail, asking for passwords, knowing when my mother was worried and when I was tired. He had enough access to wreck us because we had handed it to him in pieces. The second clue came, 3 days later, when he offered to take the car in for service so I could focus on the final grant packet. I told him no. He smiled like I was being cute. "Maya, you're overwhelmed. Let me help." I said no. His expression flickered for half a second. Just half, but I saw it. Annoyance. Not concern. Not concern at all. That evening I called the mechanic myself, and they told me my car had already been pre-approved for pickup by a Noah Carter, with a note saying I was unavailable and had asked him to handle it. Handle it. I started shaking so hard I had to grip the counter. The thing about betrayal is that once you see it, you start seeing everything else differently. His jokes that used to sound playful now felt sharp. His advice that once seemed smart now sounded rehearsed. Every time he said, "I'm just trying to protect you," I heard, "I'm trying to control the story before you do." I wanted to expose him immediately. I wanted to march into the middle of his life, wave the screenshots in his face, and watch the blood drain from him. But anger alone is sloppy. Anger makes people confess only the things you already know. I needed more. So I did what my father would have called moving like a fox. Quiet. Patient. No wasted motion. I called the city grant office under my own name and asked whether my final packet had actually been received. The woman on the phone was kind, which made the next part hurt even more. She told me a revised timeline had come in from my consultant. My consultant, Noah. That meant he had not just intercepted my work. He had inserted himself into the process, likely posing as part of my team. I asked for a full log of communications and was told I would need to submit a formal request. That request, thankfully, bought me time. Then I called an attorney my dad had once used for a property issue years ago, a woman named Denise Alvarez who had the sort of voice that made you sit up straighter even over the phone. I told her everything except the part that still felt impossible to say out loud. She told me to keep screenshots, save emails, photograph everything, and under no circumstances let anyone force me to sign a sale without reading every line. When I told her about the trust, she was silent for a moment, then said, "Your father was not a foolish man." "No," I said, staring at the old store from the front window. "He wasn't." "Then let's trust that he anticipated this kind of trouble." That night I went to the hardware store alone. It was after closing. The fluorescent lights dimmed, the aisles smelling like sawdust and old metal. My dad's old stool was still behind the counter. The bell above the door still had the tiny crack in it from when Noah and I had slammed it too hard as teenagers. Everything in that place held a piece of my father. His habits, his voice, his stubbornness. I stood in the center of the store and cried for the first time since the funeral. Not pretty crying. Not one tear sliding down a cheek. Real crying. The kind that shakes your shoulders and makes your throat raw, because the grief has been sitting in you so long it starts to feel like bone. My dad had built this place for us. He had trusted me to protect it. And now I was standing there realizing that the person undermining me wasn't a stranger with a suit and a clipboard. It was the man who had eaten my mother's meatloaf and called my brother kiddo, and once fixed my tire in the rain without asking for gas money. I wiped my face, walked into the office, and opened the old filing cabinet my father always kept locked. Inside were copies of the trust documents, the original renovation photographs, and a yellowed folder marked Emergency Contacts, Legal. On the back page, in my father's handwriting, was a note that made my chest go tight. If anyone attempts to interfere with Maya's inheritance or coerce a sale through false representation, attorney to be notified immediately. No exceptions. My father had seen this coming. Or maybe he had just known enough about people to prepare for the version of the world where kindness gets used as a knife. That was the moment I stopped feeling like a victim and started feeling like a daughter. Not a broken girl, not a fool. A daughter carrying out a promise. The trap I set for Noah wasn't loud. It was beautiful. That was the only way it could work. I called him the next morning and told him, in a voice I worked hard to make sound tired and defeated, that I had finally accepted I couldn't save the store alone. He went quiet for a split second, then softened immediately. Maya, I'm sorry. I know this has been hard. Hard. He had no idea how hard I wanted to hit him. I think you were right, I said. About the sale. That got his attention. I could hear it in the tiny inhale on the other end of the line. I'm listening. I want to meet Victor, I said. I want to hear the final offer. I'm exhausted, Noah. I don't want to fight anymore. He was careful with his voice. Too careful. You're sure? I'm sure. I told him I'd agreed to a private meeting at the store after hours on Friday. I said I needed him there because, honestly, I didn't trust myself not to back out. I said he was the only person I could lean on. That was the line that made him almost purr. Of course, he said. I'll be there. What he didn't know was that the meeting was not with Victor Sterling alone. It was with Denise Alvarez, a city ethics investigator Denise had already contacted, the Grant Board's regional director, my mother, and, as an unexpected bonus, Uncle Ray, who had been told there was finally a clean opportunity to settle the estate if everyone could just be adult enough to sign the paperwork. I had no intention of signing anything. I wanted Noah to talk. By Friday evening, the store was set up like a stage. Denise sat in the back office with a legal pad and a face like stone. The grant director, a woman named Andrea who had taken my call after hearing enough to sound personally offended on my behalf, was sitting in the folding chair near the registers. My mother had her hands wrapped around a paper cup of coffee and looked exhausted enough to break my heart, but there was a new kind of alertness in her eyes. Not trust, not yet, just willingness. And Uncle Ray had arrived 10 minutes early in a cashmere coat that made him look like he was here to purchase our family rather than support it. He kissed my mother's cheek, nodded at me like I was a child, and said, "Good, good. We can all be reasonable now." When Noah walked in, he wore the expression of a man entering a room he believed belonged to him. He looked around once, saw the lawyer, saw the grant director, and I watched the color leave his face by degrees. Only for a second. Then he smiled. "Wow," he said lightly, like this was a surprise party. "This is more formal than I expected." "It seemed wise," I said. He looked at me then, trying to read my face. I gave him nothing. Victor Sterling was not there in person, which made Noah nervous. I could tell because he kept checking the door. "That's unfortunate," he said. Victor was hoping to keep things simple. "Simple is overrated," I said. My mother looked from me to Noah and back again. "What exactly is happening?" Before I answered, I turned on my phone's audio recording and set it face down on the counter. Denise slid a folder across the table. "Mr. Carter," she said, "we're here because Miss Bennett has reason to believe there has been interference with the Bennett Trust, the city grant process, and private communications related to an estate sale." Noah laughed Yizday, once too quickly. "It does," I said, "until you realize how many things went missing after you volunteered to help." His eyes narrowed. "Maya, I opened my laptop and projected the screenshots onto the old blank wall beside the office door. I had spent 2 days arranging them in order. Messages, email logs, deleted calendar entries, the false consult note, the photos of his messages to Sterling, the text about making sure I missed the deadline, the text about the house being ours. The room went so silent I could hear the old refrigerator hum in the back. My mother stared at the wall. Uncle Ray made a sharp sound. "What is this?" Noah's mouth opened, closed, then opened again. "That's not—" "Don't," I said, and my voice came out so steady that it startled even me. "Don't insult all of us by lying now." He took a step toward me. "Maya, you don't understand the bigger picture." "The bigger picture?" I laughed then, and it sounded nothing like humor. "You mean the part where you and Victor Sterling tried to pressure my mother into selling our home by sabotaging the grant that would have saved it?" He looked at the wall again, and I saw the exact moment he realized there was no easy way out. Denise crossed one leg over the other. "We also have records showing unauthorized access to Miss Bennett's email account, a modified calendar invitation that rerouted a city call, and a phone log linking your number to Mr. Sterling's office over 30 times in the past 5 months. My uncle's face stiffened. "This is absurd." "No," I said. "Absurd as watching you sit here like you didn't spend months telling my mother this place was too much work while you quietly tried to profit from it." He turned on me with that old family anger I had seen in men like him all my life, the kind that appears when women stop being convenient. I was trying to protect this family. I looked him dead in the eye. "No, you were trying to cash in on it." My mother flinched. Noah stepped forward again, softer now, desperate. "Maya, listen to me. I did some things I shouldn't have, but not for the reasons you think. Sterling was going to take the property anyway. I thought if I could manage the transition, maybe get your family a cleaner deal." "A cleaner deal?" I repeated. "You deleted my grant call, Noah." He said nothing. "You moved my deadline." "Nothing. You told my car service I was unavailable so you could control where I went." His jaw tightened. I pulled out my phone and played the audio recording from my call with the grant office. The woman's voice filled the room, calmly explaining that the board had tried to reach me multiple times but was routed to a consultant who never identified himself as anything other than project assistant. Noah's face went pale. That was when my mother finally spoke. Her voice was quiet, but it carried more force than anything Ray had said all night. "Noah, is that true?" He turned to her as if he could still charm his way out through her. "Mrs. Bennett, I was trying to help Maya. She was drowning in stress. She'd have made this decision badly. By making it for me?" I asked. He hesitated, and that hesitation was enough. My mother stood up so quickly the chair legs scraped the floor. "Answer her." Noah looked trapped now, and a trapped man will tell the truth in fragments if he thinks it will save him. "Yes," he said finally. "I talked to Sterling, but you don't understand what he offered." Ray muttered, "God." Noah kept going, like the confession had cracked him open. There was debt. My sister needed surgery. I was trying to fix things. Sterling said if the property sold, he'd pay me a consulting fee. He said the neighborhood was changing anyway and that your family would eventually lose the place. I thought, "You thought you could decide that for us?" I said. He dragged a hand over his face. "I thought I could make sure you got something." "That's not your choice. I know that now." "No?" I said, stepping closer. "You know it because you got caught." That landed. I saw it in the way his shoulders sank. Uncle Ray slapped a hand on the counter. "This is insane. I never authorized any of this." Denise reached into her folder and produced a signed document. "Actually, Mr. Bennett, you did authorize part of it. This side agreement was discovered in correspondence obtained from Mr. Sterling's office. It indicates a negotiated payoff contingent on a favorable sale." Ray's face drained so fast I almost pitied him. Almost. My mother took one trembling step backward. "Ray?" He looked at her with the startled outrage of a man whose lies are finally being asked to stand upright in daylight. "It's not what it looks like." "That is always what men say," she whispered. "Right before they ruin everything." Noah turned toward my uncle, suddenly seeing the world shift under him, too. "You said they were on board." Ray snarled. "I said be quiet and do your part." My mother stared at both of them like she was looking at strangers in our kitchen. And there it was, the final twist inside the betrayal. It was never just Noah. It was never just greed. It was a chain. My uncle had used Noah's loyalty against us, and Noah had used our trust against us, and Victor Sterling had circled all of it like a shark with money in its mouth. I should have felt triumphant in that moment. Maybe some version of me did. But mostly I felt sick, because the people who were supposed to protect my family had turned the inheritance into a marketplace and were arguing over who got paid first. I looked at Noah, and for the first time he didn't look powerful. He looked small. Not innocent. Not forgivable. Just small enough to see the damage clearly. "You know what's funny?" I said. "I kept trying to figure out when you started hating me. I thought maybe it was when I got the promotion at work, or when my mom started leaning on me more, or when I stopped having time to listen to your problems. But it wasn't hate, was it?" His eyes flicked up to mine. "It was envy," I said. "You didn't want to see me lose. You wanted to be the person who decided how I lost." He did not answer. That silence was the answer. Denise began outlining consequences in a voice that could have frozen a river. The grant board would freeze consideration pending fraud review. The city attorney would receive copies of the texts and call logs. My uncle's contract would be scrutinized. Sterling's office would be formally notified. The trust would remain intact because no valid sale could proceed under coercion or concealed interference. I had won the legal battle before I even stepped into the room. But the real battle was the one happening inside my mother, because she had trusted Noah. She had defended Ray. And now she had to face the fact that the people she'd leaned on were the very ones pushing our family toward the edge. She sat back down slowly, her hand over her mouth, and tears gathered in her eyes. Not dramatic tears, not movie tears, the kind that come from a deep, tired place when the body finally accepts what the mind has been refusing. "I fed you," she whispered to Noah. "I let you in my kitchen. I made you coffee. I told people you were like my son." Noah could not look at her. "And you did this to my daughter?" "I'm sorry," he said. My mother gave a wet, broken laugh. "No, you're not. If you were sorry, you would have stopped before you made me hate myself for trusting you." The room held its breath. I had spent so long dreaming of revenge that I never realized how quiet real justice can feel. No explosions, no dramatic arrests, just the exact moment when lies become too heavy to carry. Ray stood first, gathering his coat with shaking hands. "This is not over." Denise didn't even look at him. "Actually, it is if you cooperate. Otherwise, it becomes something much more public." He glared at me like I was the one who had betrayed him. That was the thing about people like Ray. In their minds, consequences are always an insult. Noah stayed a few seconds longer. He looked at me with a kind of desperation I almost recognized from our younger years. "Maya, I didn't think it would go this far." I laughed softly, and this time there was no humor in it at all. "That's the problem, Noah. You never thought about how far it would go for me." He swallowed. I pointed toward the door. "Get out." He didn't move. "Now." He looked at my mother once, as if some old permission might still live there. But she had gone completely still, and stillness can be harsher than screaming. Then he left. Ray followed. The door shut behind them with the kind of final sound that settles into a house and never leaves. For a while, nobody said anything. My brother came in from the back hallway then, having heard enough to understand the shape of what had happened, but not yet all the details. Eli was 17, old enough to know the world had teeth and young enough to be furious that it had used them on us. "Are they gone?" he asked. I nodded. He looked from my mother to me. "They were lying?" "Yes," I said. He exhaled hard through his nose. "Good. I hated that guy. That almost made me cry again, because children know betrayal before they have words for it." The next few weeks were ugly in the way real consequences always are. There were calls, meetings, email chains, statements. Victor Sterling's office backed away as soon as the city opened a formal review. My uncle's lawyer tried to argue miscommunication and family tension, which would have been funny if it hadn't made me want to throw something. Noah's messages were pulled. Bank records were reviewed. and the consulting fee Sterling had promised him turned out to be tied to a non-disclosure arrangement that looked a lot like bribery once lawyers started reading it out loud. The city froze the permit review. The grant board reopened my application after confirming it had been tampered with. Denise helped us file a petition to protect the property from any outside claim while the trust was reevaluated. It was not instant. It was not cinematic. It was paperwork and hearings and stress headaches and my mother sitting at the dining table every night with a legal pad like she was relearning how to exist in a world where trust had to be measured. And through all of it, Noah tried to call. He left 4 voicemails the first week, then 6 texts, then a long email in which he used the phrase, "I was in a bad place," 3 different times like that was supposed to erase the harm. I did not answer any of them. Not because I hated him forever. Hate is too easy. I didn't answer because some people only understand a boundary when the door finally closes. My mother apologized to me one rainy Tuesday while we were sorting old receipts in the store office. She didn't do it grandly. She just set down a stack of envelopes and said, "I should have listened to you sooner." I kept my eyes on the paperwork. "You were scared. So were you." "Yes," I said. She reached across the table and touched my hand. "I believed the wrong people because they were easier to trust than the truth." That sentence hit me harder than anything Ray had said, because it was the most honest thing anyone in our family had spoken in months. I squeezed her hand back. "We got there in the end." She gave me a sad little smile. "Because you did. We won the grant." That part still makes me smile. The city approved the preservation funds after the review cleared. Victor Sterling lost the project altogether when his office was linked to a broader pattern of aggressive property pressure in the district. My uncle's role in the side agreement destroyed any claim he thought he could make. The family house stayed in our name, and the old hardware store became something my dad would have loved and maybe not recognized at first. A community market on the front end, a repair workshop in the back, a coffee counter by the old paint wall, and a small event room where neighborhood groups could meet for free twice a month. We kept the bell over the front door. We kept my father's stool behind the counter. We kept the old wooden shelf he had built himself out of leftover lumber because good wood should live twice. And when the renovation was finished, I named the place Bennett & Co. Market after him. The opening night was packed. Neighbors came in carrying flowers and casseroles and children with sticky fingers and old men who remembered when the store had sold galvanized buckets and porch nails. My mother stood behind the coffee counter wearing a blue sweater and crying openly every time someone hugged her. Eli worked the register and acted like he had not been bragging about us at school for 3 straight weeks. I was so busy I barely had time to breathe. Then, near closing, I stepped outside for air and found Noah standing across the street under the glow of a street lamp. He looked like he had lost weight. He looked tired. He looked exactly like a person who had learned too late that you can't build a future out of somebody else's ruin and expect it to hold. For a second, I thought he might come over. He didn't. He just stood there with his hands in his pockets, watching the lights through the front windows of the store he had tried to destroy. I waited. Finally, he said, "It looks good." I said nothing. His voice broke a little. "I really did care about you." I looked at him carefully, because I had spent years confusing his dependence with love, and I was finally old enough to understand the difference. "Maybe," I said, "but you loved being needed more than you loved being honest." That landed, and he nodded once like he deserved it. "I'm sorry," he said. This time, I believed he was. Not enough. Not in a way that could undo anything, but enough to know the apology was about his pain, not my healing. "I know," I said. "That doesn't change what you did." "I know. You're going to have to live with that." He let out a shaky breath. "Yeah." I almost walked away then, but there was one thing I still needed to say. "You destroyed your own life trying to steal mine," I told him. "That's the part I hope you never forget." His eyes closed for a moment. When he opened them, he looked older than he had the night all this started. "I won't." I nodded once and went back inside. People think revenge is about making someone suffer the way you suffered. That's what the movies teach. That's what angry people post online. But real revenge, the kind that actually saves you, is cleaner than that. It is exposing the lie. It is taking back your future. It is forcing the people who thought they could bury you to stand in the daylight and answer for what they did. And real peace is stranger still. It doesn't arrive like a firework. It arrives like a room after too many months of tension. When everybody finally stops pretending and the air can move again. My father's store is still standing. My mother laughs more now than she did for the first year after he died. Eli has started talking about taking business classes because he wants to keep the place running someday. And me? I stopped measuring my life by who stayed close enough to hurt me. I learned that family is not just who shares your blood. Sometimes it's who tells you the truth when the truth is ugly. Sometimes it's the lawyer who says your father was smarter than your enemies. Sometimes it's the city woman who reviews a fraud complaint and decides not to look the other way. Sometimes it's a mother who finally admits she was wrong and a daughter who chooses not to weaponize that admission. As for Noah, I heard later that he lost the consulting job, had to pay restitution, and moved back in with his mother while he tried to rebuild the mess he made. I did not celebrate that. I did not need to. Karma had done what it does best. It handed him the exact weight of his own choices and asked him to carry it alone. Victor Sterling moved on to another neighborhood, another block, another set of people with less protection than we had. My Uncle Ray sold the luxury car he used to drive around like a badge and hasn't shown his face at our place since. And my mother, who once thought survival meant selling off pieces of her grief, now stands behind the counter most mornings in a store named after the man she loved, telling customers where the screws are and which coffee blend is strongest, and how my father used to tap the register twice for luck. Sometimes I catch her looking at the walls like she expects him to walk back in. I do too. But now when I feel that ache, it doesn't feel like loss anymore. It feels like inheritance. Not the kind written on paper, the kind passed from one heart to another. The kind that says, "This was built with love, so do not let greed be the last word." And that is how I lured the man who broke my dreams into his own downfall. Not by shouting, not by begging, by letting him think my heart was still open while my eyes were finally open enough to see the whole trap. He wanted my trust. He wanted my house. He wanted my silence. Instead, I gave him a mirror. And when he finally looked into it, he saw exactly who he had become.